This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Now, welcome, Chris. How are you today as we prepare to talk about the sports movie classic, the 1979 movie, North Dallas 40?
Yeah, this movie, North Dallas 40, I had never heard of it before you mentioned it to me. And I was like, me and you were going back and forth about like a sports movie to do. And you mentioned this one, and I saw Nick Nolte was in it. It's like, yeah, okay, I'll give it a try. And I went on YouTube to look up clips, and I saw the rant that one of the football players does to the coaches. And I remember messaging you right back and be like, yep, okay, let's do this movie.
So this movie, North Dallas 40, describes a week in the life of an aging wide receiver for the fictional football team, the North Dallas Bulls. And the North Dallas Bulls team is closely modeled on the real-life Dallas Cowboys football team. The film is based on the 1973 fictionalized semi-autobiographical novel of the same name, North Dallas 40, by Peter Gent. Gent played wide receiver during the mid to late 60s on the Dallas Cowboys. He was good friends with legendary quarterback Don Meredith, whom the quarterback character in the novel and the film are based. In the book and in the movie, he's called Seth Maxwell, and he's played by the singer-actor Mac Davis. Gent's character in the film is called Phil Elliott, and he's portrayed by Nick Nolte. You'll recognize many of the actors in this movie, including Bo Svensson, real-life former football player John Matusak, Charles Durning, Dabney Coleman, Steve Forrest, and G.D. Spradlin, to just name a few. And much of the cast is actually from Texas, which I found interesting. This movie hits on a number of really important topics for sports. In the late 60s, when Gent played, the early 70s, when he wrote the novel, and then the late 70s, when the film was made, the issues of drug use for both personal enjoyment and to enhance performance, player misconduct on and off the field, and the pressure of professional sports, which all of these carry on to this day. So I think it's a really interesting movie that captures the movie and the book, and then the career of Gent really capture a whole different aspects of football as it progressed from kind of just a game that people played and not quite as serious to a serious multi-million and multi-billion dollar industry by the time of the 1970s. Really what we would probably get into what is the modern day of football really carries. It was just really kicking into high gear when this film was released in the late 1970s. And in a lot of ways, it was the conditions in which they played in were more difficult in a lot of circumstances than today, because as we'll get into this movie, they did not pay attention to their nutrition as well as football players do today. They don't physically train the way they do today, and the use of alcohol and drugs and partying, which, the football players will get busted now and again for excessive partying, but nothing like the way they did it in this film.
Yeah, the biggest thing that probably grabbed people's attention in this movie is the players smoking, which was like the first thing that kind of grabbed my attention. Phil Elliott, it always seems like in every scene in the movie, he's got a cigarette in his mouth. And it's like, it's just one of those things you see, and it's like, you're a professional football player. Like, what are you doing? But then, you read like old stories, and it wasn't that uncommon. Like, it wasn't uncommon. These guys just smoked darts all the time. Guy Lafleur who was a famous hockey player in Canada in the National Hockey League. Apparently, he used to smoke like 3 darts in between the period. He was one of the highest goal scorers of all time.
Yeah, I think that's such a difference between sports players now and even not that far into the past. I mean, you're talking in the 80s. I remember in the 1980s, there was the Chicago Bears, and they had the refrigerator Perry, and he scored a touchdown during I want to say it was the 87 Super Bowl against the Patriots, and he just barely lumbered over the goal line. Yeah. There's guys who are his weight today who can run the 40-yard dash and as fast as running backs did back then. Yeah. There's no comparison. There's nobody on a professional football team today who's going to have a gut like Phil in North Dallas 40 when he gets into the pool to massage his knees and he's got a big spare tire. There are not players who have that in this day and age.
The guys nowadays, and they say that they're testing them like consistently. As somebody who's done amateur like bodybuilding for a big chunk of his life, to be like 230 and shredded with like 4 or 5% body fat is just not. It's just not attainable without some extra help. And in this movie, they don't show that. Like, I don't think in this movie that anyone is taking steroids. But they're taking all different other types of drugs to just function throughout the day. Various painkillers, alcohol, marijuana use. The painkillers seem to be the biggest issue for a lot of these guys dealing with injuries, just so they can just function throughout the day, let alone get back onto the field for the next game.
Well, that's a really big theme of the whole movie and the book is the line between recreational drugs and drugs that the team is giving them. During the entire movie, Phil Elliott is smoking marijuana and he's doing it for recreation, but it's also he's doing it medicinally. He's self-medicating for all of the aches and pains that he has and the psychological damage that a lot of this has done to him. And the team has a gigantic problem with that. The administration, the coaches, and the owner of the team, that's a big theme in the book and in the movie of this illegal drugs that he's taking, marijuana, against the really hardcore drugs that the team is giving him to alleviate his pain and the players' pains. I mean, they're giving them high-end narcotics to get each of these players through the game.
Yeah, like probably the most like well, there's a couple of scenes where you see it. One is Phil and his buddy Seth. They break into the medicine cabinet at one point and they're just popping pills and sitting in baths. I don't think they're the chief medical coach or what have you isn't quite happy about it, but he basically admits it's like, oh, this goes on all the time. So it almost seems like he's just kind of putting up a show. And then Delma, who was one of the players on the North Dallas Bulls, he hurts himself in practice. He says his hamstring popped, and so the coach BA goes up to Phil and says like, well, I think I'm going to need you to play on Sunday or Monday. I can't remember which day it was. And Phil's like, I'll do whatever I need to do to play. And he has this one liner, I think it's to Coach BA, which is kind of sums up his smart ass character. He's like, he says, oh, I love needles. And so right before the game, they shoot him up with, they never make clear exactly what it is, but I'm assuming it's a high end like painkiller that just numbs whatever the issue is. So you won't feel the pain and you could just keep on playing. That doesn't change the fact that you're probably damaging yourself more in doing that because you shouldn't be playing. But they make sure they do it right in front of Delma. So Delma feels like he gets pressured into taking the shot too, because the coach comes up to him later, says, well, look at Phil. He's doing what needs to get done for the team to win. And Delma, he puts up a fight at first. And then eventually he says, like, screw it, I'm just going to take the needle, and he takes it. So this is kind of like the manipulation that the coaching staff has in terms of the drug use that goes on the team. they pick and choose when they want to get upset.
Yeah, and they show a lot of dichotomies in this movie of the young players like Delma and the backup quarterback, who he's the up and coming guy who's eventually going to replace Seth as the head quarterback. And he's really wet behind the ears, a green player. And Seth is about as grizzled of a veteran as you can possibly get. Seth's into the drugs. Seth's into, he's always has 3 or 4 women on him. But Seth, all of the players have to, especially in Dallas in the 1970s, need to at least put on a facade that they're moral and Christian, and just the whole thing of everything you could imagine of Dallas in the 1970s. They have to portray that. They have to wear a suit going into the game. They can't just come in their sweats or with like a 70s suit with the shirt buttoned down to their navel. They have to put up a facade of this thing that's expected of them. But behind the scenes, you just rip the corner and it's just complete debauchery of what they do in their parties, but also this dichotomy that's set up between Phil and Delma. Delma is young. He doesn't want to juice or take any of these drugs because he knows they're going to hurt his career in the long term. Phil's already destroyed his body. But he still wants to be the first string player. He doesn't want to ride the bench. Yeah. It's the same thing with Seth versus the other quarterback. These two, the veteran players know that they're very soon reaching the end of the line for their careers, but they're going to fight until the last second to get the most they can out of it. Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like James Early's Key Battles of American History podcast and many other great shows. Go over to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, and you mentioned Phil has a good line to Delma. I think it was after practice and Phil's getting a B12 shot from the coach. I don't think they actually do those anymore. B12, it's like so it's like a vitamin that apparently it helps with your awareness or what have you. I'm not sure if they do those anymore, but it's kind of irrelevant. Delma comes in, he says like, "Oh, I don't understand how you can pop all those pills and put all those needles in your body. It's destroying you." And Phil says, believe the line goes like, Phil goes, "Eventually you'll find out it's the pills and the shots is the only thing that will keep you going." So in a sense, he's giving a little bit of advice to Delma. It's like, eventually you're going to be me on this table if you keep on doing that.
Now, what did you think about this whole thing that they set up of Phil? Phil is really, and the whole movie takes place in just a week's time from the Monday after the big game that they win against Seattle in preparation to the championship game against Chicago. What do you think about Phil's attitude? Because I think that that's really the key to the movie. Is it's a change in Phil as a character in this week.
Yeah, me and I see a lot of myself in Phil, to be honest with you. Like, to me, like, Phil kind of represents the guy that's going to be a rebel his entire life. He refuses to like fit in. He refuses to like play the game within the game, as Seth Maxwell puts it. That's an important line throughout the movie, is like Phil has to understand, like, yeah, you might be like the best guy. You might have the best hands in professional football, but if you can't play the politics of professional sports, you're not going to last long. And Phil just generally refuses to play that game. And he has in that same scene, he has a line to Seth, basically saying, well, eventually, if you have to pretend to be somebody else if you do this long enough, you end up becoming that person. And he's just generally like, the coaching staff thinks he's immature. The owners think he's immature. He doesn't seem to really pick up on hints very well, where the owners at one point basically telling him, it's like, hey, I want you to be part of this whole thing. You just, got to smarten up a little bit. And Phil just either doesn't get it or just doesn't want to listen to it. And he's as he says in one of the scenes too, he's known as the team funny guy, right? He's smarter than everybody else. Well, at least he thinks he is. And he just has he's just very quick-witted. That was the general impression I got from him.
I guess for me though, and this is maybe the discussion, does Phil sabotage himself? Is he too smart for his own good is my question, because you see that, yeah, okay, in the locker room it's funny, or when they're in the classroom and BA wants to look at the tapes for the 50th time and Phil's joking around, that's one thing. But is he sabotaging himself by fighting against the system? Like, you can fight against the system in the and kind of be a pain in the head coach's side in a funny way, but he's really just completely torpedoing his whole career after football in the way he behaves through the movie.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Phil brings a lot of the problems onto himself too, right? Phil is, all-star wide receiver. He could have any woman, but the woman that he decides to have a semi-affair with is Conrad Hunter's brother's girlfriend.
Yeah, the owner of the team's brother, who I think his brother was high up in the team as well. He decides to have an affair with his fiance,
which is he could have any woman really, and this is the woman that he picks, and of course they're going to find out. It's, I guess in a sense, to him, it's oh, this is me sticking it back to the owners. But it's, I don't know, it's, you've brought it up before. I mean, really, what are you accomplishing with that? You're not accomplishing anything.
That's what you get to the point of, what is he accomplishing by being so rebellious about everything? And that's what I tried to get into Phil's mind. What is his end? Does he really think that he's going to beat City Hall, so to speak, that he's going to really, BA and Conrad and all the management and administration, they're going to really see that Phil was right the whole time? And because he doesn't even make a case for what he thinks is right and wrong in this whole situation.
No, he seems to be kind of aloof from it. He knows he doesn't like, we know he doesn't like this situation, but he doesn't pinpoint exactly what he doesn't like about the situation. We know in the movie that he's a pure athlete. All he wants is the chance to catch that football on Sunday and just play the game. That's what he doesn't like, all the other stuff that comes with playing professional football. That's basically what we get. And I guess in his mind, if I start changing even a little bit how I am, just get in on the inside to maybe hopefully try to change things better for the players, that just even that little bit of a change, it's going to force him to change all the way. And before you know it, he's going to be like Coach BA, or he's going to be like Conrad or Emmett.
I think it's always that story of who's the sellout. And you set up that dichotomy between Phil, who's going to fight to the very bitter end against the system, or Seth, who's completely embraced the system. Seth pretends that he's an upright moral citizen. Seth does whatever he needs to do in order to secure his position in the hierarchy. And, would you call Seth a sellout?
I mean, I was thinking about this today, and the comparison between Phil and Seth, and this might sound a little weird, but it reminds me of punk rockers. Phil is the guy that was never going to sell out to a big record company. And he was, I don't know, to me, he comes across as somebody who would be perfectly happy kind of just playing shows in front of a couple hundred audience members, but people truly see that his dedication to his endeavor, whereas Seth goes to himself, I can't do this forever. I might as well, sign that big record deal and I'll go mainstream.
Well, there's a couple of issues I think that go with that. For one thing, that is the pinnacle of the success for Phil. There is no small shows for him to go play to just be a wide receiver. I think that you have to embrace the situation that you're in, even if you do have to compromise with yourself. I just don't understand what he felt he was compromising against. Yeah, they're all jerks. BA was a jerk in a lot of ways. The managements were jerks. And, I think they said that Conrad was a defense contractor. And yeah, that all sucks. And it would make you feel a little queasy to be around these people, but you still have to look out for yourself in the end, that this is the career that you chose. You want to play. You've got to play to somebody else's tune now and again, especially you're in the NFL. You have to play NFL ball, and it's not just all catching passes. You've got to play the politics of it.
And Phil, the only comparison I can make, the only thing I can say is that Phil was just never going to accept that side of the game. To him, it had nothing to do with football. If anything, it took away from the sport of football, and he'd rather just not be part of it. And I mean, he shows throughout the movie that he can put up with some of the stuff, but once it reached a certain point, Phil said, I just can't do this anymore, and he just quits.
Well, we'll get to the quitting part. So let's hold off on that for just a second, because I'd like to explore just a little bit more. I don't understand I really don't understand what Phil's goal is in all of this. I just think that, what does he think is going to come of him just pushing back and pushing back and pushing back against this system that can't be changed?
I guess he thinks like, I'm going to try to take the shots that I can. I might not be able to really take on the whole system and change it, but I'm going to make my smart aleck comments here and there, and I'm going to take the shots that I can once in a while. I guess it's like a job it's like a job. Anybody's ever had a job they never really enjoyed. It does kind of feel good once in a while if you can screw around with the managers who are mean, right? Once in a while, and it might not change anything, but you yourself definitely feel better.
I think it goes beyond, though, with Phil, we don't know what happens before, but I feel like in this week, it goes beyond from just passive aggressive, I'll get a shot in at BA. He really keeps cranking it up. And he has the push and pull within himself that he wants to play. He wants to catch that big pass. He keeps going back and forth with this, of the absolute joy that he feels from catching making the big play. And then when he just completely, I think that he got hit in the chest, and it just bobbled, the ball fell right out of his hands. And I think he feels that it should be enough to give 100% on the field, and that all this other stuff shouldn't matter. And I think that that's what finally is the straw that breaks the camel's back, is that he maybe finally realizes that it's never going to be that way, that it doesn't matter what's on the field. Like when he fights with BA over his statistics.
That was one of the better scenes in the movie. They call Phil up to the office and they're looking over his statistics. But first thing is Coach BA doesn't even look at Phil. He goes, I'm looking at all this data and it says you're immature. And Coach BA he's not even looking at him. And I think that's one of the moments where Phil is saying to himself and starts questioning, it's like, do I even really want to be doing this anymore? And the difference is Phil is, what you brought up is Phil's unable to see the whole big picture of it. All he sees is himself catching that ball, and he looks at his stats. He goes, well, I'm successful in all these high pressure situations. I've been doing this for, I think it's 7 years, they say in the movie. Why are they benching me? Whereas BA has to look at the totality of the picture. He has to look at the entire team and utilize Phil in a way that he thinks is where Phil's better utilized, which is probably being a veteran presence on the bench. Now, I'll argue Phil probably should have played more based off the movie. It seems like he's been riding the bench on and off a lot. But if you have a faster, younger wide receiver, of course you're going to play him, right? And Phil he can't, I don't know, he's unable to see it from the management's perspective.
Yeah, I think that in that scene where BA, he's got his computer next to him that has all the stats on it, but he's just looking at Phil, and he says that it's immaturity. He's benching Phil because Phil is poison on the team with his attitude. And I think in that point, you could see it that you could see it as BA's being a jerk to Phil, and he's trying to put him in his place. But I could also see that BA's trying to coach him, that Phil, there's more to life than just this game coming up, and there's next season, there's your life after football, and you have to grow up. He quotes that line from Paul of, when I was a child, I did childish things, and when I put away childish things. And you could say that BA was just being condescending, and that's how I felt the first time I watched the movie, is that it's just condescension from BA. But I think when you take it with what BA is doing, what Conrad was doing, what Seth was doing, I think they really were trying to coach Phil into being a better team player for his own benefit.
Yeah, and you can totally see it that way too, where Coach BA is trying to help Phil, because he knows Phil only has maybe a couple years left being able to play, and Seth knows the writing's on the wall for him too, himself personally and for Phil, and he drops hints throughout the movie. It's like you gotta learn how to play the game within the game. Otherwise, it's just you're not going to be able to play at all.
Yeah, I think they set that up too really well, and it's a thing. I watched this movie probably 50 times when I was a kid, and it never really struck me until I've watched it a couple of times more recently. The character played by Bo Svensson, he's Joe Bob. And he's like the absolute archetype, meathead, jockiest to jock football player from the 1970s you could ever imagine. And he comes in his suit saying how he's opening up a chain of restaurant franchises. And I think you could blow that off like, oh, this is just, silliness, and he's getting played for the fool. But I think that he's the one who's actually, they set him up that he's a total, he's an absolute bore in every scene, saying vulgar things. He's racist. He's a drug abuser. He's a misogynist, but he's doing these. And Phil is really none of these things. Phil is they paint him, at least in the movie and certainly in the book, that he's kind of a hippie, progressive. He's not a Neanderthal, basically, like Joe Bob is. And this guy is smart enough to get the deal that after football, he's going to have some sort of career. Seth's going to come out and he's going to have a career after a life after football, where it just seems to me that maybe Phil didn't want a life after football in football.
Or he couldn't imagine a life after football too. Because that's all he wanted to do. And that's the way I kind of interpreted it. Phil he just could not see himself like not preparing for that game on Sunday where he can make that big catch. Because that's all he wanted to do. And it's interesting that you brought up Joe Bob, who's, like you said, he's a Neanderthal. And even he kind of gets it, right? Like, I'm going to try to open up restaurants with my name stapled to it. And hopefully I'll make a living doing that after football is all done.
And so then it comes to the big game. And I think that the big game is really, that's where everything really gets tied together, where BA benches Phil for the game. Delma agrees to get medicated on his leg so that he can play. And this game is just brutal. And I think in a lot of ways it's the brutality of football, and it's amped up for dramatic value. But the Bulls they're not getting beaten, but they're not doing well against the Chicago team. And they're just getting, Seth is getting his lunch eaten all day by this player, Alcy, who's a defensive end for the Chicago team. And they did, the two players, Joe Bob and John Matusak's character, they decide they're going to go nuke LC, and they go and just take the cheap shot of most cheap shots and shatter LC's leg. You think about how fragile these people's careers are. Somebody like LC, his career is likely over with that hit.
Yeah. And to even bring it to modern times, like a lot of fans complain about like players holding out for money on this and this and this. I know hear a lot about it in hockey, and I know in football too. But that scene really kind of sums up like why they do what they do, because all it takes is one hit and that's it. You're done. Like Delma, maybe he plays again.
Oh yeah, tell us what happened to Delma, because Delma's the corollary to what happens to this defensive lineman from Chicago.
Yeah, so Delma catches a pass. This is after he's taken his shot, and he says like, "Oh, I can't." Like he mentioned, I think maybe it's to Phil or somebody. He says, "Oh, I can't feel a thing," and he makes a catch, and then his leg, I guess the numbing wore off, or the pain became too unbearable, and then he gets smashed in the face with a big time hit, and his face is all messed up, and he has to get taken off the field, and Phil is on the ground with them saying like, "Oh, fix his face," and BA screaming at Phil to get back in the huddle, and Phil's looking at Delma, and he looks at BA like doesn't even seem to really care like what just happened to Delma, even though they're the ones that kind of pressured him into that situation. And I don't know if Delma's ever going to play again after a hit like that. It was brutal.
And you look at Delma, the very next play, that's where Seth throws the big game-winning touchdown to Phil. And it's like Delma never even existed. And I think that that's so much of football. Somebody gets completely zapped. They're out of the game, potentially out of their career, and they'll never step on the football field again. But that very next play, if it's a big play, then that person's memories erased, and the fans adore the team, and the team is through the roof with emotion that they've won. And I think that really stuck with me after that one particular scene. Phil too. It's not like Phil is sitting in the backfield saying, "Oh, I scored the game-winning touchdown, but I still feel bad for Delma." He's cheering and congratulating with the team as much as anyone else is.
Yeah.
And you see the high and the low with Delma getting taken out, high Seth throwing the touchdown to Phil, and then low again when they miss the extra point and they've lost the game.
Yeah, I like that touch that they did in the game, because I wasn't expecting that. Because it's like very rarely do teams ever miss the extra point. Like it does happen, but it's not very often. And I like that they added that it was Hartman was the one who kind of screwed it up. And if during the movie you can see that Seth kind of screwed around with Hartman to cheat, so Hartman would be off his game a little bit. And there's like a 2-second shot where Seth kind of looks like, "Oh man, I screwed up." That's just my opinion. That's the way I interpreted it, because Hartman's head wasn't in the game. He was worried about all this other stuff. And yeah, you get the shot inside the locker room after the big loss, which I thought was fantastic the way they did it, because it really shows you that all these guys, they really care. This is what they live for, is being able to pull off these big wins, because that's when it matters the most, right? You can win throughout the regular season as much as you want, but if you can't pull it through in the big moments, nobody remembers what you did in the regular season. They only remember the big moment. And one of the offensive linemen, OW, who plays right beside Joe Bob, he does like this epic rant. I can't say it here because there's a lot of swear words, but he does this epic rant to Coach Johnson, and basically the rant back and forth goes like, "We need more than just what you guys are giving us on the 4th down, and the game's on the line. It's like, you guys call it a business, I call it a game. I call it a business, you guys call it a game." And it really sets up like the disconnect that, at least on this team, that the coaches and the players are speaking almost like a different language.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. When it really boils down, they're sitting in the locker room, and it doesn't matter that Seth makes so much money, or the money means nothing. And I'm sure if we went back to Super Bowl last year where Patrick Mahomes is sitting in the locker room afterwards, it didn't matter that he's making $45 million. He lost the big game. And it doesn't matter if he goes and gets into his Mercedes-Benz car, or none of that matters to these guys. Winning is what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, for the really because be able to play professional sports at that level and deal with the fact that like you can be horrifically injured at any time. You have to be thinking on like a different level, right? And the winning for a lot of these guys is, that's all that matters to them. Like the money is important. I get it. But when they want people to look back at their careers and look at this guy was able to pull through in the big moments, right? Everybody wants, especially in football, everybody wants to be wants to be remembered like Tom Brady's going to be remembered as the guy that, went through ups and downs and was able to pull through when it mattered the most. Because
they really are, in a way, like you say, is their memory. And it's almost like Achilles of the olden days. These people really are playing for more than just money. It really is, in a lot of ways, glory. Like, as long as there's a professional football, people are going to remember Joe Montana's name. They're going to remember Tom Brady's name, and other players' names. But it is more than just money. And you really see that in that final scene when O.W. John Matuzak's character, like you said, he really is genuinely upset in a way that no money would ever fix that. He would have probably have given away money in order to have won that game.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's leading up to the big game. There's that probably one of my favorite scenes too, is like the before the game, and you see all the players, how they get themselves pumped up before the game. But the owner Conrad comes in, and I guess the coaching staff and the ownership decided this is how we're going to really motivate these guys. Conrad comes in and says like, well, if you win this game, you get to spend like a week on my private island. And this is their big like speech to motivate these guys before the big game. People like OW and Seth and Phil and Joe Bob, they don't care about any of that. Like, that's your idea to motivate them, is a vacation.
Yeah, I think that's why, if you think of through all of sports, why fixing games is so unusual and it's so shocking. I mean, you have to go back to Pete Rose in the 80s, or the White Sox scandals in 1918. Those things stick around for so long because it's so shocking that people who play these games don't want to win, and that they find some external factor that they'd rather have than winning. I think it's very rare. I mean, there's in some sports where they'll, in boxing, where people will take a fall and stuff like that. But when you get to the rank of professional sports, it's so rare and shocking to see players who aren't giving in their 100%.
Yeah, because it flies in the face of every reason why somebody plays sports, even from, when you're a kid to, or if you're just playing in a beer league or what have you, you're playing the sport because you want to win. And for people to go like, oh, I don't know, I'd rather have the money than winning, it flies in the face of everything about athletic competition.
I think too, it's that's why, I mean, we're sitting here in 2022 when Kyrie Irving, the player for the Nets, he throws away maybe his whole career to not get the COVID-19 shot. And, people can get the shot or not get the shot or whatever. But for somebody, most of the players have taken the shot. And I thought it was very interesting that somebody at that level would make that decision.
Yeah, well, then Aaron Rodgers too in football. I guess he's like the biggest guy. He refuses to get the shot. It hasn't really affected him so much.
Yeah, there's a couple of NFL player, Cole Beasley for the Bills, didn't get it, and there's a couple others. They have other testing requirements and that sort of thing. And it's interesting that they've caused a lot of dissension and arguments in their locker rooms by those decisions. And so in a way that they're kind of putting themselves in the Phil Elliott's shoes, where they're making these decisions that could very well affect their after career. I think that those are kind of maybe the closest corollary you could get or comparison you could get to Phil is maybe somebody like Kyrie Irving or Cole Beasley, Aaron Rodgers, who are making this decision not to get the vaccine, and what kind of problems is that causing in their team and for their own career.
Yeah, I guess the coaching staff would have to look at it this like, okay, what does the individual bring on the field, and then how much of the can we put up with the stuff off the field, and does it compensate? Like, does it work? Like, Aaron Rodgers is probably the best quarterback in the league, or he's right up there. So I mean, if it's causing a problem in Green Bay's locker room, the Terrell Owens, who was a football player, used to make I remember one time he was holding out for a new contract, and he's working out it was funny. I thought it was funny, but he's working out in his parking lot or what have you, and he's making a big spectacle of it. And he's making it all about him and nothing about the team. And to me, that's somewhat of the difference.
You could almost compare Phil. Phil is actually a way toned down version of Colin Kaepernick, where Kaepernick was making a choice that that caused not only problems and conflict in his locker room, but in the entire league and amongst the fans. And I think you could see that somebody like Colin Kaepernick, agree with him or not, he made a stand on what he was going to do, and he did it. Where you could say with Phil, everything that he was doing, of all of his protests against the machine, so to speak, was all in the back. It was all in the locker room. It was all behind the back of the house. Kaepernick was really Phil cranked up to 100 and doing it in the front of the house.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. Like, when the coaches are talking about how Phil's being immature and he's not doing this and that, if you look at the movie, Phil's he's not making it public. It's all, for all the public knows, if Phil's getting benched because he's hurt, or you know what I mean. He's not you never see a scene where he's going to the media and go I should be the starting wide receiver. Look what I've done for these last 6 seasons or what have you. He never. Yeah, it's all it's all in house. Where Kaepernick it was all right out in the open. It was all, I know, somewhat controversial, what have you, but it all became about him and nothing at all to do with the team.
And I think so that really leads us into that final scene. The real, it's the denouement, it's the ending, but I think that the real ending of the movie is when they lose. But then there's that final scene in Conrad's office. And I had a really hard, maybe you can set that scene up a little bit and we can talk about it, because I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around that last part.
Okay, so they lose the game when they miss the extra point. And so it's the day after, and Phil is at the ranch that he's slowly building up, because you find out in the movie he does have this dream of one day owning a ranch. I guess he's going to raise a couple of cattle and chickens on, and horses seem to be a thing that he wants. He's talking to Charlotte, and then he gets a call from, I guess, the North Dallas headquarters saying, "Oh, you got to come down. We got a meeting." And he goes down to head office and basically ambush them as soon as they walk into the room. They're asking Phil, "Where were you on this date?" Yada, yada, yada. And Phil's just pretending "Oh, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I can't remember." And then they bring in Private Eye. And you saw this Private Eye throughout the movie. It wasn't like in your face per se, but the Private Eye says "Oh, well, I seen Phil smoking marijuana cigarettes." That's those exact words that he uses, here, and here. And he was over at this person's house. And that's when, they find out that he had been sleeping with Emmett Hunter's girlfriend. Yeah, they basically tell him "We're going to terminate your contract without pay." And Phil says, "Well, if it's because you don't want to pay me," he's "I don't care, I quit." And that's the scene in the nutshell, but there's more going on in there.
Yeah, and says to me, were they planning to do this all along? Was that what the whole point of the week was? To just get some contrition out of Phil to BA, and then in the end, not have to fire this nuclear bomb onto Phil? Because you have to presume that they have these dossiers on every player so that they have something, because it goes back to that scene. Remember the backup quarterback who's gunning for Seth's job, they set him up to have a affair. He's this guy actually is like, he's a legitimately moral person. This backup Walker is his name. He doesn't want, he's a church choir boy. He doesn't want to get involved in all these things. And then I think Seth drugs his drink and gets him to do all sorts of debauchery that they record and know about. And it seems like maybe the team wants to have these dossiers on all the players of things that they can use against them.
I think going into the season that they were looking to move on from Phil. I think certain people in the organization wanted to move on from Phil. Emmett was probably the one pushing for it the most. And I really, truly think if they had made that extra point and had won the game, that meeting doesn't happen. Be like, well, we can't do this. But they did lose that game. And they decided whether they're going to pull the trigger on getting rid of Phil, because maybe they don't want to pay his contract and they're getting tired of his smart aleck attitude, right?
I think that's probably, I think even up to that point, if Phil had just said, I'm sorry, I won't do any of this ever again, I'm going to be a team player, I think he could have probably worked his way out of it. I think though that whole, the way they did it of backing Phil into the corner, that's where he just had enough. And he just said, I'm done with this. Forget it. It's not worth it to me. I'll go on to my 20 acres and raise horses. This just isn't worth it. I'll figure it out.
Well, and then BA is talking to Phil about, you got to think about the team and you got to make sacrifices. And Phil's like, what are you talking about? I literally have a piece of myself on every single field across the United States. And you're telling me about sacrifices? And it's easy for BA to say. He's not the one that's getting, I mean, most coaches played football at one point in their career, but he's not getting hammered every week. And, the biggest thing is like, they're giving him crap because he smoked a little bit of marijuana. And Phil goes to him, it's like, you guys shoot me up with hard drugs just to get me onto the field. And you're gonna bust me for this? I think it was just like, he couldn't deal with the double standards and the politics and the backstabbing and the manipulation anymore. It was just so in his face at that point. He just like, I can't do this. I'm done.
Yeah, it really is. That Phil was somebody who was probably on the edge, and this was his breaking point, and that was it. And he couldn't do it anymore for himself. And I agree at that point that it was really, that was the end of the line. And I think he had all the right in the world to just walk away at that point, that there was no point in groveling to them anymore. He could have made any number of decisions before that, but I think this was the point that if that's really what they were setting him up for, it was probably a good time for him to walk off.
Yeah, and this is where sometimes when I was watching the movie, Phil kind of reminds me of myself a little bit. Is like that meeting kind of reminds me of like, that would be I think that's pretty much the reaction I would have. Where I said, you know what, it's just not worth it anymore. It's a little bit different because he's playing professional football. I can get another job somewhere else, but where I can deal with the fair amount of BS, but when it gets to that point, and I've done it before where I've walked out on jobs. So